It's almost impossible for me to talk about God of War Ragnarok without delving into spoilers, but this part is me doing my best. Ragnarok works tremendously well for me as a sequel to 2018. I'm not sure how well it would hold up if you hadn't played the previous game, but I can't imagine it would be anywhere near as gratifying or impactful an experience. Combat's great, gameplay is by no means a weakness, but at its core, this is a narrative-driven game, and its plot is inextricably linked to its predecessor. I see this as a positive, and as someone completely in love with that first game, I didn't feel let down at all. I want for nothing. I'm really sad now, but I was before I played the game too, so who knows what happened. They didn't tie up every single loose end, I still have questions, but they gave enough answers and provided enough new threads with their own satisfying endings that I'm overall pleased. I loved this game. I couldn't recommend it more highly. If you like the first one, I assume you'll like this one too. It's not as tight and cohesive or as finely polished, but it adds so much that they more than make up for it. It made me change my mind about certain things I thought I wanted because the way they actually happen is even better than I could have imagined. Does it beat Elden Ring for Game of the Year? Well, these are two completely different things. One is a story-driven, linear experience with a lot of heart and emotion and character development that I will never forget as long as I live. And the other one's a choose-your-own-adventure sandbox with almost no explicit story, no emotions. I watch anime while I play it, and I've sunk in around 450 hours. They're both masterpieces, they're both modern gaming marvels, but they fulfill two completely different roles as mediums of entertainment. As depressing as it can be, as challenging and oppressive, when I go back to Elden Ring I do it for fun. But I did 3 playthroughs of God of War for the experience. I wanted to feel like I'd absorbed as much of what the developers were trying to convey as possible. It's also fun and has amazing, even more in-depth combat, but I'm not playing it for fun. I'm playing it over and over because I love being here. I love this version of Norse mythology, I love this universe. I love these characters, and I'm truly going to miss them. Elden Ring is one of the best video games of all time. I think it's even in my top 10, but so is Ragnarok. Only Ragnarok was something a little bit more than just a game to me. It's also a vehicle for one of the best stories ever told through the medium. I've learned a lot over the last 4 years from Kratos and Atreus, as well as everyone they met on their journey. Now that it's finally over, I'm profoundly sad. But even so, I loved that I got to play it, and I still have some hope for a possible future I'll talk about in another video, or I won't. And also, yes, God of War Ragnarok is my game of the year. It made me cry and think about stuff. Now I have to talk about some spoilers, or a lot of them. It's probably still a jam even if it is spoiled for you, but I'd rather everyone go in knowing absolutely nothing. Maybe treat the rest of this more like a support group and less like an actual review. I have no idea what I'm doing. Visually, the game's very pretty, its world feels living and populated, and it pushes PS4 graphics as hard, if not harder, than The Last of Us Part 2. It doesn't look as good in spots as Horizon Forbidden West, but in terms of characters and conveying subtle emotion through facial capture and motion performance, I think this game is the absolute greatest of all time. Environments are varied in a way only a fantasy game could ever deliver, art direction even more iconic and unforgettable than it was in 2018, and particle effects look super sparkly and energy-like. I love the way the camera plays with light, either directly from the sun or reflecting off a waterfall. In every way, this is just a beautiful game. There's definitely an issue with pop-in and some invisible or partially invisible enemies, but the vast majority of the 9 realms look gorgeous. Sometimes there's so much happening everywhere on screen I can't believe my PS4 didn't explode, but nay, handled it better than Cyberpunk. Although I guess that really isn't saying much. Yeah, see? And I want to mention how much I love this thing they do where they focus on one character and keep the camera tracking on them, like this amazing one shot where Sindri retrieves the Dropnir ring. I say that like the entire game isn't one shot, which it is. They did it again, those absolute monsters. The high-quality look of everything and exceptional cinematography help with an overall feeling of AAA prestige game you're constantly being drowned in at all times. It's not always fun to get around this enrapturing world with its interconnected pathways and huge open spaces, but they do a few things that greatly improve quality of life. Climbing, for instance, still sucks a heap, but now we can occasionally grapple from spot to other pre-designated spot. On one hand, this is great because it makes traversal faster and less tedious. On the other hand, they now expect you to go back through that entire climbing section again because of the lower time commitment. By that same token, in most of the larger areas, we get a sled to help us move along more quickly, but now everything is so spaced out we have a similar amount of downtime anyway, so it feels pointless. Unless they did it just to make this one desert or the Lake of the Nine seem more realistic and imposing, in which case it more than serves that purpose. Shit feels downright immense sometimes, like the first time I saw the crater I wasn't even excited, I think I just said "oh my" out loud. It's impressive they were able to keep the looping, ever-expanding pathways model working at this scale, not to mention all the other little mechanics and puzzles sprinkled throughout. I'm not going to bore you to death with all of it, but that reflective glass in Alfheim was ingenious. All the new puzzles are, but this is obviously special. I have around 30 more minutes of me doing this. All these things and more work together to create a unique, similar feeling, but also very new and memorable vision of the Norse world. Anyone who called this DLC before release is probably the same type of person who said Halo Infinite had a good story. Another place those new mechanics, including that beautiful purple glass stuff, gain immense utility is in combat. Whether I'm getting the huge stun hits on samurai elves or swinging on a grappling hook only to drop down and deliver the fury to that one enemy that just moved out of the way, never mind, I feel like I have more options than ever. But I also feel like some of these newer implementations limit my creativity and force me out of my preferred playstyle. Like the blue ring thingy that you have to double tap L1 for or you take massive damage, sometimes half your health, you can't engage with that if you're trying to throw the axe from far away. You have to be close enough to hit them with your shield. In some cases you can get far enough away that it doesn't matter or interrupt with a runic attack instead, but only in some cases. In the Maven fight, you're trapped in a small room and you have no choice but to stay right on top of this person. Also, they're blocking the exit and you have to defeat them or revert to an autosave. That was mean. Better example is the Needhog fight where you're on this big bridge. It's the first time I noticed the game being super pushy about the blue ring maneuver. Once I got used to it, it was fine. I just played the fight the way they wanted me to, but that in itself is a problem for me. That it takes away from my ability to choose how I fight this abomination for such a deeply video gamey reason. This only hurts because most of the time I can pick and choose exactly how I'd like to handle an encounter, which of the 3 weapons I use, what degree to focus on runic attacks versus close encounters of the melee kind, long-range doom hurling, status effects, and how your build can complement your playstyle. My favorite build was focused around building up Bifrost damage as quickly as possible and also shooting it out of Mimir's face.
Still unpleasant.
Another great one was this unarmed poison build that melts through man and beast alike. In this way, all of combat feels more varied and exciting than the last game. The axe and blades still function relatively similarly to how they did before, but now they seem like even more useful and integrated parts of gameplay. Sadly, we do not get Thor's hammer like we all expected and wanted, but the drop in your spear quickly became my favorite weapon. I love it just like I did the big cold boy in 2018. Blowing up infinite replicating spears sounds like something that would wear out its welcome over time, but what am I talking about? No, it doesn't. There's a surprising amount of depth in the combat if you're looking for it, and plenty of difficult encounters for those rowdy enough to try. Kratos feels by the end of the game as fun to play as and as capable as ever, so you can imagine my surprise when the camera finds itself over the shoulder of Atreus, and he was even stronger for some reason. His melee destroys dudes. This is probably just because his enemies tend to be lower level, but it still felt super weird. Between his impressive agility and being a long-ranged character, I wound up enjoying playing as him more than Kratos for a while. It's not only because the bow and arrow was a good time, I also loved the boy's story during these isolated coming-of-age sections. I refer to this collection of charming chapters as Little Loki's Big Adventures. Letting us spend so much time in Atreus' tiny little hobbit shoes, I don't think hobbits wear shoes, and getting to access Kratos and his emotions through the boy perspective was a masterstroke. We get to both feel for Kratos as a protective paternal figure, but also relate to little Loki as a maturing young man protagonist all his own, and a great one at that. I would pre-order Atreus Goes to Egyptian College right now if I could. Our young hero's journey started all the way back when he first set out in the direction of deer all those years ago. He already knew a thing or two about how to hunt, but what he really had to learn was what his father knew how to do best. To kill. Kratos is kind of the perfect guy to teach you that. By the end of the game, to a degree, the boy has learned to close his heart when necessary, but also that there is a balance. That his way was too naive, but his father's old way was too cruel, and between the two of them, with some help from Mama Bear, they find a new road forward. In this game, Kratos has an entirely different and much more relatable goal in mind for his son. To learn to live without him. Seeing the boy through his old, pasty eyes, it's easy to worry, but slowly, by playing as Atreus, meeting the people he does, and going the places he goes, I started trusting the boy more and more. In Midgard, I thought he was in way over his head and gonna get impaled on Freya's sword, but he survived. In Ironwood, he meets Angrboda, learns how to be Loki, and for the first time gets to build his own identity. He helps his new best friend deal with her big grandma, stands next to a cup so I could laugh at that image, and they give birth to an exponential growth serpent. This section is where I started to feel a lot more like Atreus was my character in the game, and not just my character's son. And by the end of it, this section is where I started to believe maybe he doesn't need Kratos after all. Maybe he has learned how to close his heart and solve problems on his own. But I wasn't sure. Next time we find our camera behind the boy, he runs away to Asgard, -5 trust points to Gryffindor, and we meet a whole slew of new important characters, many of whom serve to teach us about our two protagonists and their relationship. We see Atreus socialize with a new group of gods and see how they live, as well as how his time with Angrboda has already started to change him for the better. He seems more confident, more in control, and starts to find his own success. Then, maybe as a result of that confidence and this chaotic momentum, he makes one of his gravest mistakes. Befriending Skjolder. I hate that guy. What purpose does he serve ever? And also accidentally freeing a gigantic, soulless, immortal wolf kaiju capable of tearing apart the space between realms. Or, as Mimir puts it,
"This is a fuck-up of not insignificant proportions."
I know, shocking, a kid with incredible power and no supervision made a big mistake. But what was surprising to me and Kratos is how well he handled it. The results that came from this kid's plan were far better than the lethal intervention the Ghost of Sparta wanted. This kid, suddenly, petting his obedient, soul-imbued, realm-tearing former adversary with a big smile on his face, doesn't look so much like a kid. Right afterward, we get an important, impeccably performed conversation between the two, ending in the assertion that each will keep the other's thoughts with them at all times. As a parent, we're further reassured Atreus may not need us, and as the player, I start to wonder if I'm actually more worried because maybe Kratos needs Atreus. Kratos has already changed a lot over the course of the last game, and in the time between, he appears to have grown even further. Talking to Mimir and actively raising Atreus, getting along with other people rather than being isolated in the woods, he's learned a lot, and it definitely shows. He's had years to consider what he saw on the wall in Jotunheim and the kind of man he wants his son to be when he can't look after him anymore. While knowing his prophesized death lies close at hand, he starts trying to make excuses to go on small adventures with his son. Not just to teach him a valuable lesson or set a better example, but because he wants to spend time with him. This is one of the clever ways developers occasionally trick you into doing side quests that you would never know were a side quest until it was over. Some of the game's best emotional moments came from side quests. The real ending of the game is technically even a side quest, though that term kinda loses all meaning when everything is so important and occasionally results in huge character development. This is where I feel like the game's narrative does a lot of work. Not just on these little side missions, I mean yes in them too, but walking back and forth on the world tree, being on a boat, anytime companions have a moment to speak with each other. These characters feel alive, and not only that, they feel like old friends you've known since 2018, partially because you sorta have. Walking around or climbing and talking with Freya was where I first started to buy her eventually half-forgiving Kratos. By the way, Freya absolutely nailed it again, she's so good. I didn't only feel feelings for the main cast, I loved these four very much, but the villains were absolutely incredible. Heimdall is a given, of course you love him. Thor, he's huge, he's real. When everyone else is lying to Atreus and manipulating him, he's still like, I'll kill you, you little shit. I love him. Beautifully written, perfectly portrayed, best Thor ever. Makes Marvel Thor look like a shallow cartoon character. Ratatasker, also a terrifying villain in his own way, pro ZD rules. But the All-Father himself, Odin, the one-eyed gangster CEO psychopath, is on a whole other level. Everything he does, from the way he grabs this stool and just invites himself to sit down, to how he's constantly raven-warping around barking orders at scared people in subtly threatening ways. He's never completely overtly, directly evil in front of our eyes, and the one time he is, he immediately starts trying to justify it with, I didn't want this. Everything he says is so well thought out and delivered. He's the best master manipulator I've ever seen portrayed in a game. The fact that some players actually liked him and bought his shtick, thinking he may actually be a good guy, is hilarious. I mean, I liked him too, hell, I almost adore the guy, but as a dangerous snake-type gentleman to avoid at all costs and slightly admire the cunning of. He appears genuinely convincingly likable, both in that first scene in Midgard, and here in my favorite scene talking to Heimdall.
He means to betray you.
Is that true, Loki? You a little trickster? I'm just messing around. Of course he means to betray me, huh? Heimdall, why else would he come? I've given him no reason to trust me. Not yet. But he's got some very big questions. And I have so many answers to give.
Also of note, if you go back and listen to Tyr's dialogue throughout the game, a lot of it's very pointed and nasty in the context of who's actually saying it. Speaking of which, I wasn't sure how these guys fit in, but I think maybe the point is that they sort of don't. Brok and Sindri are the heart and soul of this game. Being our blacksmith shop dudes for 2 whole journeys, being as hyper-relevant to every moment of this one as they are, it was exceptionally heartbreaking that once the story's over, they're both gone. They were our anchors, they were the first people we meet before Mimir. This was never supposed to be their problem. Even if they made the hammer and the axe, this was never their fight. Although if you think about it, to be fair, this was never really Kratos' fight either. The one who set all of this into motion is Faye. She sent them on this path, had them take down their own protection, leading to Baldur eventually showing up looking for her, and the rest, as they say, is PlayStation history. She really did seem like a wise lady for the most part, if a bit freaky at times.
Time is running out, my love, and there is much to do.
Mother! Mother!
Brother?
She changed Kratos, or helped him change, from a raging monster into the kind of guy who only puts out one candle before going to sleep. I don't even think that did anything. There are a lot more candles. She communicates vague messages to Kratos and he takes her completely literally because of course he does. Remember the time Mimir tried to tell him a riddle?
Somewhere out there's a riddle you'd enjoy, and I'm going to find it.
Do not.
Once spoken, instantly broken. What am I?
Silence.
Correct!
I was not answering the riddle.
She lived with this guy for like 7 or 8 years, maybe longer, and she didn't know he can't do metaphors? Mimir's a far superior wife. When Faye said, "Protect our son," she didn't mean physically, "Kratos, you gigantic candy cane-colored dolt." She was telling you to protect our son, who he is as a person. Give him a real, honest chance. Love him, trust him, open your heart to him, and teach him to do the same. And despite perhaps an initial misunderstanding, Kratos does what she asks. All of it. He does raise the boy to be a man Faye would be more than proud of. He does spread her ashes from the highest peak in the realms, and he does protect their son. By the end of the game, I had no doubt little Loki was big enough to adventure on his own. Yes, because of the talk him and Kratos have about feeling the pain of others, but mostly because of this one quick moment when you're running through the trenches of Asgard and Angrboda seems like she's in trouble. Kratos tries to advise his son to trust her and push forward, but Atreus says it first. We don't need to tell him anything anymore. He kept his promise. His father's voice is already in his head. With or without us, he can do this. He is ready. And so, the hardest part wasn't picturing Atreus out there alone without Kratos. The hardest part of this ending, aside from seeing Sindri like that and Mimir's answer to Brock's riddle, was that I never shook the feeling Kratos still needs Atreus. And they do a great job trying to make you feel better about it. You get to go around with Mimir and Freya, lots of new endgame stuff to do, and for once you get a small glimpse into the way Faye actually saw Kratos. This image isn't just a prophecy of a possible future. I think this is the way she looked at her husband, as a man who would change and not just stop being a monster, but become a hero. And maybe she knew the only way to communicate that to him was to show him this at that exact moment after having gone on this journey, after having learned the lessons she wanted to teach him. Even now, there's still a lot I don't understand. Like, why did Atreus ask Kratos if he was hungry and then just feed the deer to his wolves? Is Ingrid still out there somewhere, like Thor's hammer was after Ragnarok? How did Faye die? Who blew the horn? Why this one candle? Was that the bright one? In 2018, despite being such a simple story, I had a hard time trying to illustrate the point of it all. Yet with Ragnarok, it felt like a much larger, more complicated tale that I could sum up pretty quickly. But I think he says it best.
Listen closely. You feel their pain because that is who you are. And you must never sacrifice that. Never. Not for anyone. I was wrong, Atreus. I was wrong. Open your heart. Open your heart to their suffering. That is your mother's wish. And mine as well.
This entire game has a point. Everyone in it and everything that happens all builds up to this idea that results matter, but it matters even more why you did it. That doing the right thing matters, even if it might not work out in your favor. It is worth it to love. It is worth it to grieve. God of War Ragnarok was one of the most engrossing, enriching, and emotionally devastating pieces of media I've ever consumed. And part of that could just be the music. It is really good, and they go all in on the motifs. They're not even subtle with it. But no, I think it speaks much more to the quality of the product as a whole. And also the music.
To grieve deeply is to have loved fully. Open your heart to the world as you have opened it to me, and you will find every reason to keep living in it.
Goodbye, Faye.
I love you, Mom.